Hey, my name is ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co and screen reads on ShawNshawNacting.com. Today we're going to review The Green Knight. So this is a film by David Lowery. He's also the writer, so it's always that nice combination director-writer, which you kind of have that pure ideas from the beginning, kind of the blueprint stage of writing it to actually directing it, so it has much of a cohesive idea, environment, or you has that taste of the feel of the director much more than if you have the director and writer separate and all that. Kind of similar to how Quentin Tarantino has a unique vision. This guy definitely has a unique vision brought to light. The time is 2 hours, 10 minutes. It does feel a little bit long, but it is kind of a mystery, fantasy, a little bit horror kind of feel to the film. So those films tend to be longer sometimes. And I feel it's appropriate. It's kind of like that 70s feel to a film. You have Dave Patel plays Gawain, this knight that's lusting for an adventure to earn the trust of the king. Anais Rizzo plays Helen. Joe Anderson plays Paris. Alicia Vikander plays Essel the lady. Noelle Brown plays the madam. Sarita Choudhury plays the mother. So this strange Green Knight kind of arrives at the court, and he challenges any one of the knights of the king to go to kind of a duel with him. And he says, whatever cut you make, I make at the end of the year. And everyone's like, ooh, what's this? And this young knight steps forward. He's kind of untested. He's green. And so he wants to really prove his worth to the king. So he's like, I take the challenge. Then the Green Knight just bows down and said, okay, chop my head off. And he's like, what? Are you sure? What? I want to do a battle. And he's like, no, just chop my head off. And then so he chops his head off. The kind of tree forest kind of knight dies, and then all of a sudden he picks up his head and rides off, and he's like, I'll see you in a year. And he's like, oh shit, what did I sign up for? Because now this Green Knight, this new knight has to go, find this guy at the end of the year and maybe have his head chopped off. And he's like, man, I just shortened my life by 30, 40 years, right? He thought he was going to have the glory of being a knight at the round table kind of feel, and now he's going to be slaughtered to the masses. So, time passes by, and then he has to go off on this voyage. So it's kind of a really kind of unique tale. Well, not a unique tale. I think there's a quest is a classical type of movie role, but this is kind of a unique twist on the quest, I think. I like the fact on this film about, it's director-writer, single vision, so it's just very unique. It really comes across in the storyline, and the effects, the sound effects, the lighting effects. There's really a bizarre sense of the way sound is used in this film. It gets very loud, and then very quiet, and very booming, and then it's quiet, and then shrill, shrieking kind of chanting, and then quiet again. So there's quite a bit of play with the sound effects in the film. Very nice historical use of chanting, very little musical instruments, so kind of this spooky environment of living in this medieval world. And it's also interesting because supposedly they're Christian, but then they have kind of the sign of Lucifer, right, with the 5-star thing. So you're like, how does this play into it? Are they Satanists? Are they Christian? So kind of this really bizarre world, right, where it's kind of like you don't know if they're kind of the Druid worlds before Christianity arrived. Are they Christian? So it's really interesting because if you look at the shield of the knight that goes off on this voyage, it's kind of like a classical Greek iconography. So then you would think, okay, well then it's early medieval era. They've already been Christianized, but then why would they have this pentagon, right? It's just kind of this really weird mix of symbols in this film. It's really cool in the sense they have the crown, has kind of this floating disc, which is kind of the classical early medieval artwork. They would kind of do these gold discs behind someone to say they were a saint. And in this case, it's the king. So it's, hey, maybe if the crown was actually made like this, it makes sense why they painted him that way. So it's kind of a cool visual effect that the crowns weren't really like this, but to paint that the fact that they're holy, they did this. So here they've kind of taken it straight from the medieval art and made it to a visual form. I really like the crowns in the sense that they're really kind of crude and simplistic. More of a realistic crown versus a crown of jewels would have been kind of way later, maybe in the 1500s when they discovered the New World and the riches, and then the kings and queens became very powerful and had all these jewels to spend. But in this early medieval era, they would have been simple, small city type of lords. So they wouldn't have that much power per se. They would just have kind of a small lord and some farmland they controlled, and then they protected the farmers, and then the farmers gave them their bounty. So I like that it wasn't over the top with the costumes. Yeah, the mystery is really interesting on the quest because you just don't know where it's going. So it really has a really nice twist on these various challenges the knight's put through, but you don't know why he's being put through them, if he's going to be killed and he's going to be seduced or he's going to be drowned in some water. Or, there's multiple challenges he has to go through. It's really just kind of proving his mettle along the way. And yeah, there's just all these different challenges he goes through. You just don't know any idea where the movie's going to. You're like, is this going to turn into a horror film? Is there going to be this badass scene at the end? It's just kind of like, you don't know. This is kind of meandering all over the place. So you're like, it's just really strange and just riveting for the strangeness of it, So it's just kind of interesting use of camera angles and lighting to really kind of dramatize the film and also give this weird sense of just the unique director's vision of the film. Like they have really low camera angles, for example, when the knight is walking to show that he's this grand, powerful knight, per se, of the king's trusted knights. So it's interesting in that world, as well as kind of the downtrodden horrors that the knight is sleeping with. Is she going to be married off with him? Is she not going to be married off with him? So there's a lot of quandaries, too, with females and how the females are seen as either whores or ladies to marry off and secure your bloodline kind of thing. So it's really interesting traditional roles of how marriage actually worked probably in the medieval age and why it worked that way. So it's a very interesting perspective that's very different from the modern age where people just see the marriage as kind of outdated or no point to it, just kind of symbolic, but without the real true value. And here you see the real value of marriage. It's to have a true bloodline, to increase your power as a lord. Any easygoing women are just kind of tossed aside, even if you have kids with them. And the interesting thing is this knight that's on this voyage, he's also a kind of a bastard kid. So it's really interesting that, he's kind of the nephew of the king, but he shouldn't really be the power holder, but somehow he becomes the power holder. So that's kind of this interesting quandary of family ties within a kingdom, who would get the power after the king dies. The interesting part, too, is if you look closely, the king resembles the Green Knight, who also resembles the knight as he grows old and his kind of future prediction of the future. So it's a really interesting kind of overlay there. One thing they did add in here is they added some just non-European features, which is fine, I guess. From a film perspective, they kind of want to lighten the mood, not make it as accurate. I mean, it's a fantasy world, so it's not really, you don't have to have it, but there would have been no black kids and there would have been no dark-skinned people in this time frame. This time frame would have been set in England or maybe France or Germany. Could have been set in any of those European lands, but at that time frame, you only traded locally. You might have only been 100 miles away, so all these people would have been white, it just being European, some kind of European background. Any kind of olive skin from Spain, that might have been the case in Spain because Spain did have Arabic blood. So if they had done it in Spanish and it was northern Spain, you could say, okay, maybe that makes sense. But still, there probably wouldn't have been any black kids at all. There just would have been, all the slaves back then were white per se. As far as I know, they were Mediterranean. So there could have been olive skinned slaves, but there really weren't dark-skinned African slaves at this point. That was kind of a newer thing at the 1400s onward. Once you discover the New World, you need this new power of the slaves to kind of mine all the gold and farm the tobacco, farm the cotton. And so then you had kind of the black slavery was brought about as they conquested Africa. And Africa wasn't really conquested at all until the 1800s. So if you know your history, there's no way this is possible that you'd have black kids in England at the time frame. These people at that time frame, you had the English fighting the French, so they didn't even like other countries that were right next to them. They would have fought to war to death. I mean, England and France went to war for 100 years, so if they don't even like the next guy next door that looks almost the same as them, speaking a slightly different language, why would they accept someone of a different skin color? So historically, it's not very accurate, but it's a fantasy tale, so they want to kind of lighten it, I guess, to make it more kind of global, fine, but it's inaccurate from that aspect. I don't really care. I mean, who cares? In the end of the day, it's just a film, but it's a little bit of PC culture slipping in there, but whatever, It's just a film to have it fun, and it gives her a little bit of representation. So I guess that's a good thing in a way, but it's irritating in the sense that it's historically inaccurate, and the rest of the film is pretty historically accurate per se somehow. Not exactly, because like the shield and the castle and stuff is kind of historically separated by hundreds of years, but for a fantasy world it's okay. But then you have these other historical inaccuracies. It's kind of a little bit irritating, but it's a film end of the day. I don't think he dings it too much. It's just it's just one of those Hollywood things they do. They try to make a PC culture somehow, right? This has very little of it, but it's just a little bit sneaking in there. I'd rate this film very entertaining. I think Probably this film you'd watch it several times just because it's very unique in the sound effects and stuff. And you'd be like, what the hell's going on? What does this symbol mean? And you'd probably be discussing it. So you might rewatch it in a few years, right? You might watch this every 5-10 years. You might be like, oh, let's watch this again. What was this about? Oh my God, this is so weird. Let's watch it, because it's just so riveting and weird. And most films don't have that. They're like say The Jungle Cruise I saw it the week before. That's kind of a one-watch film, you're done. A big tentpole kind of Hollywood Disney film doesn't have the levity or the gravity of this type of film where it's very unique director vision. I'd encourage you guys to see it. If you guys want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.